November 24, 1944. Morning light spreads across Tokyo. The air raid sirens begin their wail at 1:15 p.m. Citizens pause. Factory workers glance upward. Civil defense wardens scan the horizon, but the sky is empty. No formations, no glint of aluminum in the sun, no engine roar, just blue. Then the sound arrives, a deep, distant rumble, not from any direction, from everywhere, from above, but impossibly high. The kind of sound that enters through the chest before the ears understand it. Anti-aircraft crews train their guns upward. Spotters press binoculars to their faces. Nothing, the sound grows, vibration in the streets, windows hum. Still nothing visible, then the first bomb falls. It screams down from nowhere. Concrete erupts near the Musashino aircraft plant. Then another. Explosions bloom across the industrial district like flowers no one can see being planted. Fighter pilots scramble. Engines cough to life, Zeros climb, but they climb into emptiness, somewhere above 0 feet, beyond sight, beyond reach, beyond the capability of Japan's defenses. 111 B-29 Superfortresses are rewriting the rules of war. The Japanese are fighting an enemy they cannot see, and they are losing. By the autumn of 1944, Japan stood alone. Germany was collapsing in Europe. Italy had surrendered. The Third Reich's cities burned under Allied bombing runs that blackened the skies. But Japan remained defiant. The home islands, Honshu, Kyushu, Shikoku, Hokkaido, had never been conquered, not in 600 years of recorded history, not by the Mongols, not by any foreign power. The ocean was Japan's fortress wall. American forces had hopped across the Pacific. Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Guam. But each victory came soaked in blood. The closer U.S. forces pushed toward the Japanese mainland, the fiercer the resistance became. Kamikaze attacks intensified. Civilians trained with bamboo spears. The military leadership spoke openly of Ketsugo, the final battle for the homeland, where every man, woman, and child would fight to the death. Japan's air defense network reflected this confidence. Fighter groups stationed across the home islands flew the Mitsubishi A6M0, the Nakajima Kai-43 Hayabusa, and the newer Kawasaki Kai-61. Experienced pilots, those who survived the meat grinder of the Pacific, knew their aircraft intimately. They knew how to intercept bomber formations. They had done it before. In April 1942, 16 B-25 Mitchell bombers launched from the USS Hornet in the Doolittle raid. They struck Tokyo, Yokohama, Nagoya, and Kobe. The damage was minimal. The psychological impact was enormous. It proved Japan was vulnerable, but it also proved something else. Bombers launched from carriers couldn't carry enough ordnance to matter. They barely made it out alive. After Doolittle, Japan reinforced home air defenses, more radar stations, more anti-aircraft batteries, more interceptors positioned near industrial centers. Early warning networks stretched across coastal observation posts. Civilian spotters trained to identify aircraft silhouettes, and for 2 years it worked. American bombers couldn't reach Japan from any land base. China-based B-24s and B-25s struck occupied territories and coastal targets, but the home islands remained beyond their range. The distances were too vast, the logistics impossible. Japan's military planners calculated the math. The nearest Allied airfields sat over 500 miles away. No bomber in existence could carry a meaningful payload that far and return. The Pacific Ocean itself was the ultimate defense. This confidence shaped Japanese strategy. Resources poured into offensive operations, holding the perimeter, expanding southward, securing oil from the Dutch East Indies. Home defense remained important, but secondary. The real war was out there, in the islands, in the jungles, at sea. But the Americans were solving the distance problem. In 1943, U.S. forces captured the Marshall Islands. Then the Marianas, Saipan, Tinian, Guam. These islands sat roughly 500 miles south of Tokyo, still far, still challenging, but within theoretical range of a new aircraft under development since 1940, the Boeing B-29 Superfortress. Japanese intelligence knew about the B-29. Reports filtered back from China, where the first combat missions launched in June 1944 against targets in Bangkok and Manchuria. These raids were ineffective, mechanical failures, logistical nightmares, poor accuracy. The B-29 seemed like another American experiment, impressive on paper, troubled in practice. What Japanese intelligence didn't fully grasp was the scale of the American commitment. The B-29 program cost $3 billion, more than the Manhattan Project. Factories across the United States retooled to produce the Superfortress and its components. Boeing's Seattle plants worked around the clock. Wichita, Renton, Marietta, thousands of workers, many of them women, in riveted aluminum, wired electrical systems, installed the pressurized cabins that would allow crews to breathe at altitudes where the air was too thin to sustain life. By November 1944, the Roman 21 Bomber Command had established forward bases on Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. Runways stretched 500 feet across coral and crushed limestone. Quonset huts housed ground crews. Fuel depots stockpiled thousands of gallons of aviation gasoline. Ordnance bunkers filled with bombs, high explosive incendiary fragmentation. Brigadier General Haywood S. Hansel commanded the Roman 21 Bomber Command. A protege of air power theorists like Billy Mitchell, Hansel believed in precision daylight bombing. Hit the factories, destroy the means of production. Cripple the enemy's ability to wage war without resorting to indiscriminate city burning. The B-29 made this possible. Its four Wright R3003, 150 engines generated 200 horsepower each. It could carry 20 pounds of bombs. It could fly over 3 miles without refueling, and it could operate at altitudes above 30 feet, higher than any Japanese fighter could effectively reach. But the B-29 was not born easily. It was the most complex aircraft ever built. 4 engines, each temperamental, prone to overheating, prone to catching fire. The Wright R3350 duplex, Cyclone radial engines were engineering marvels, and engineering nightmares. They demanded constant monitoring, oil temperatures spiked, cylinder heads cracked. Mechanics worked through the night, every night, just to keep the bombers airworthy. The pressurized cabin was revolutionary. It allowed crews to fly at 30 feet without bulky oxygen masks and heated suits. At least in theory. In practice, the pressurization system leaked, seals failed, temperature control malfunctioned. Crews still flew in fleece-lined jackets, still breathed supplemental oxygen, still endured sub-zero cold at altitude. The remote, controlled gun turrets, another innovation. 4 General Electric turrets, each housing twin, 50 caliber machine guns, controlled by gunners seated inside the fuselage. A central fire control system allowed any gunner to take over any turret. It was sophisticated. It was also fragile. Electrical failures were common. Guns jammed. Turrets froze. Test flights revealed problems faster than engineers could solve them. Crashes during training killed crews. Engine fires on takeoff. Structural failures at altitude. In February 1943, the second prototype crashed in Seattle, killing Boeing's chief test pilot Eddie Allen and his entire crew, plus 20 workers on the ground when the burning bomber plowed into a meatpacking plant. The Army Air Forces didn't have time to wait for perfection. General Henry Hap Arnold pushed the B-29 into production before testing was complete. It was a calculated risk. The war in the Pacific demanded long-range strategic bombing capability. Without it, the only way to defeat Japan was invasion, an invasion that would cost hundreds of thousands of American lives, perhaps millions. Arnold gave the B-29 program absolute priority. Resources flowed. Production accelerated. By mid-1944, B-29s were rolling off assembly lines at a rate of over 100 per month. The first combat wing deployed to India and China in early 1944. Operation Matterhorn. The logistics were absurd. B-29s had to fly fuel and bombs over the hump, the Himalayas, from India to forward bases in China, just to supply themselves for missions against Japanese held targets in Manchuria and Southeast Asia. The missions were costly, mechanical failures aborted more sorties than enemy action, bombing accuracy was poor, the distances were crushing. Matterhorn proved the B-29 could fly and fight, but it also proved China was the wrong base of operations. The Marianas changed everything when U.S. Marines secured Saipan in July 1944. Engineers began constructing bomber bases immediately. Seabees bulldozed jungle, crushed coral into runways, paved taxiways. Within months, the islands transformed into the largest air base complex in the Pacific. Tinian alone would eventually host 6 runways and over 20,000 personnel. From the Marianas, Tokyo was 500 miles north. A long flight, a dangerous flight, but achievable. The Roman 21 Bomber Command arrived in October 1944. General Hansel began planning the first mission against the Japanese home islands. The target, the Musashino aircraft engine plant in western Tokyo. The factory produced engines for Japanese fighters. Destroying it would cripple aircraft production. Hansel's plan relied on the B-29's altitude advantage. Japanese fighters, the A-6M0, the Ki-43 Hayabusa, even the newer Ki-44 Shoki and J-2M Raiden interceptors, were designed for agility and dogfighting. They were lightly built, no armor, minimal self-sealing fuel tanks. They traded protection for speed and maneuverability, but they had service ceilings. The Zero could reach 33,000 feet in theory. In practice, climbing to 30,000 feet took over 30 minutes and drained fuel reserves. At that altitude, the thin air robbed engines of power. Control surfaces responded sluggishly. Pilots gasped for oxygen. Combat effectiveness dropped to nearly zero. The Ki-44 and J-2M were specifically designed as high-altitude interceptors. They could reach 36,000 to 38,000 feet, but they were rare. Production numbers were limited. Most Japanese fighters defending the home islands were older models, incapable of sustained operations above 25,000 feet. The B-29 cruised comfortably at 30,000 feet. Some flew even higher, 32,000, 33,000 feet. At those altitudes, the Superfortress was virtually untouchable. Japanese anti-aircraft artillery faced the same problem. The standard 75 mm and 88 mm AA guns had maximum effective ranges around 25,000 feet. They could fire higher, but accuracy plummeted. Shells burst thousands of feet below the bombers. Shrapnel scattered harmlessly. Japan's radar network was adequate for tracking aircraft at medium and low altitudes, but high-altitude detection was spotty. Early warning often came too late. Fighters scrambled, climbed, and arrived to find the bombers already overhead, already dropping their payloads, already turning for home. Hansel believed this altitude advantage would allow precision bombing without prohibitive losses. Fly high, stay out of range, drop bombs from 30,000 feet using the Norden bomb site, destroy strategic targets. Win the war through industrial collapse. It was a clean theory. War is never clean. On November 17, 1944, the first B-29 mission against Tokyo launched from Saipan. It was a shakedown run. Only 24 bombers participated. Mechanical failures forced several to abort. Those that reached Tokyo found heavy cloud cover obscuring the target. Bombing results were negligible, but the mission proved something crucial. The B-29s flew. They reached Japan, they returned, and the Japanese couldn't stop them. General Hansel scheduled a larger raid. November 24, 1944, over 100 bombers, clear weather forecast, Musashino plant, western Tokyo. High-altitude precision attack. The mission briefing was straightforward. Climb to 0 feet before reaching the Japanese coast. Maintain altitude. Fly in formation. Drop on the lead bombardier's signal. Turn south, head home. Crews understood the danger. This was Tokyo, the heart of the empire, the most heavily defended city in Japan, but they also understood the protection altitude provided. Up there, in the thin cold air, they would be invisible. Angle 1. The human factor crews trained for the edge of survivability, the men who flew the B-29, were not typical bomber crews. They were younger, on average, than their counterparts in Europe. Many were fresh from stateside training, barely 20 years old. They had volunteered for a program that didn't yet exist when they enlisted. They learned to operate an aircraft that was still killing test pilots. Training was brutal. At bases in Kansas, Nebraska, and New Mexico, crews practiced high-altitude flight until it became instinct. They learned to manage engine temperatures. They learned emergency procedures for engine fires at 0 feet. They learned how to feather a propeller, how to restart a dead engine, how to fly on 3 engines on 2 engines. They learned what hypoxia felt like. In altitude chambers, instructors removed oxygen masks without warning. Trainees experienced oxygen deprivation firsthand. The euphoria, the tunnel vision, the sudden conviction that everything was fine even as they lost consciousness. It was a lesson you couldn't learn from a manual. Your body would lie to you. The instruments wouldn't. They trained for missions lasting 14 hours or more. Take off before dawn. Climb to altitude. Long overwater navigation with nothing but ocean below. Target run, return flight. Landing after dark, fuel tanks nearly empty. Engines overheating, hydraulics failing. The physical toll was cumulative. At 0 feet, the temperature outside the aircraft dropped to 40 or 50 below zero. The pressurization system helped, but it couldn't replicate sea level. Crews endured the equivalent of 0 feet cabin altitude for the entire mission. Headaches, nausea, fatigue, dehydration from breathing dry oxygen. The bomber itself was a loud, violent environment. Engine noise penetrated everything. The airframe shuddered and flexed. Turbulence at altitude could drop the aircraft hundreds of feet in seconds. Men vomited into relief tubes. They urinated into bottles. They ate cold sandwiches and drank coffee from thermoses that froze solid. And they did this knowing Japanese fighters would try to kill them. At briefings, intelligence officers showed silhouettes of Japanese interceptors. They explained the Ki-44's rate of climb. They showed gun camera footage of head-on attacks. They described ramming tactics, Japanese pilots deliberately colliding with B-29s when ammunition ran out. But the crews also knew their advantage. Altitude was armor. As long as they stayed above 0 feet, most Japanese fighters couldn't touch them. The few that could reach that height would be struggling, oxygen, starved, slow. The B-29's defensive armament 50 caliber machine guns could shred any fighter that got close enough. The men believed in the aircraft. They had to. Belief was survival. Angle 2. The technological marvel engineering feats that made 0 plus feet possible, the B-29, represented a quantum leap in aviation technology. Everything about it was bigger, heavier, more complex than any bomber before it. It weighed 120 pounds fully loaded, nearly double the B-17 Flying Fortress. Its wingspan stretched 141 feet. Its 4 engines produced 800 total horsepower, but size alone wasn't revolutionary. Capability was. The pressurized cabin allowed crews to function at altitudes that would incapacitate unprotected humans within minutes. The fuselage was a sealed cylinder, maintaining pressure differential between inside and outside. Air compressors driven by the engines fed breathable air into the cabin. Relief valves regulated pressure automatically. This was unheard of in combat aircraft. Bombers in Europe, B-17s, B-24s flew unpressurized. Crews wore heavy oxygen masks, heated suits, fleece-lined gloves. Frostbite was common. Men passed out from oxygen system failures. The B-29 eliminated most of that suffering. The remote gun turrets were another breakthrough. Previous bombers required gunners to sit exposed in turrets, freezing, wrestling manually operated guns. The B-29's gunners sat inside the pressurized cabin, controlling turrets electrically. A sighting station with a periscope and trigger. The system computed lead angles automatically, adjusting for airspeed, target speed, range. When it worked, it was devastating. Japanese pilots learned quickly that attacking a B-29 from any angle brought them into overlapping fields of fire. The tail gunner alone controlled a turret with twin, 50, calibers and a 20 mm cannon. The Norden bombsight was the same device used in European operations, but the B-29 stability at high altitude made it more effective. The bombardier lay prone in the nose, eye pressed to the viewfinder. The sight calculated wind drift, airspeed, altitude, and bomb ballistics. At the release point, the bombardier toggled electrically. Bomb bay doors opened, ordnance fell. From 30,000 feet, bombs took nearly a minute to reach the ground. Gravity accelerated them to terminal velocity. By impact, a 500-pound general-purpose bomb hit with devastating kinetic energy, punching through roofs, detonating inside factories, igniting fuel stores. The engines remained the weakest link. The Wright R3350 was a masterpiece of engineering and a maintenance nightmare. 18 cylinders arranged in 2 rows, supercharged, producing phenomenal power, but the cylinders ran hot. Exhaust valves failed. Oil consumption was staggering. Mechanics changed spark plugs after every mission. They replaced cylinder assemblies. They rebuilt engines in the field. Engine fires were the leading cause of B-29 losses in the early months. Not enemy action, not accidents. Engines catching fire on takeoff, fully loaded with fuel and bombs. Crews had seconds to decide: abort and crash on the runway, or keep climbing and hope the fire extinguishers worked. Many didn't make it, but those that did, those that reached altitude, delivered their bombs and returned. Proved the concept. The B-29 could do what no other aircraft could. It could strike targets 500 miles away. It could fly higher than defenders could reach. It could carry enough ordnance to obliterate an industrial complex. It was a weapon Japan had no answer for. Angle 3. The Japanese perspective radar blind spots and fighter ceiling limitations. Japanese air defense commanders watched the B-29 program with growing alarm. Intelligence reports from China described the new bomber's size and performance. Captured documents revealed specifications. Interrogations of downed American aircrew provided operational details. The picture that emerged was troubling. Japan's fighter force was designed for a different war. The Zero had dominated Pacific skies in 1941 and 1942. It outmaneuvered everything. Its range was extraordinary. Its pilots were aggressive and skilled. But the Zero was fragile. A few hits from 50 caliber rounds would tear it apart, and its engine, the Nagasaki, lost power dramatically above 20,000 feet. Newer fighters addressed some weaknesses. The Kai-44 Shoki and the J-2M Raiden were built as interceptors. Heavier, faster, better armed, they could reach 35,000 feet eventually, but production was limited. Training new pilots to fly them took time, and by late 1944, experienced pilots were a dwindling resource. The high-altitude problem was oxygen. Japanese fighters carried oxygen systems, but they were basic, bottled oxygen, manually regulated. Pilots had to monitor pressure gauges, adjust flow rates, manage supply. At 30,000 feet, a pilot consumed oxygen rapidly. A long climb, a sustained intercept, and the bottles would be empty, and the cold was debilitating. Japanese fighters had minimal cockpit heating. At altitude, temperatures plunged. Pilots wore leather jackets, gloves, scarves, but still the cold penetrated. Fingers went numb, muscles stiffened. Reaction time slowed. Intercepting a formation at 30-0 feet wasn't just difficult, it was nearly impossible. Radar coverage added another complication. Japan's early warning network relied on coastal observation posts and radio direction finding. Radar stations existed, but they were primitive compared to British or American systems. High-altitude detection was unreliable. By the time radar operators confirmed a raid, the bombers were already over the coast. Fighter scrambles became desperate gambles. Pilots launched, climbed as fast as their engines allowed, and hoped to reach interception altitude before the bombers struck and turned away. Often they arrived too late, or too low, or with insufficient oxygen remaining for effective combat. Some pilots tried head-on attacks, diving from above, firing, then breaking away before the defensive guns could track them. It required perfect timing and nerves of steel. Most attempts failed. The B-29 formations were tight. Defensive fire was concentrated. Attacking pilots faced walls of tracer fire. Ramming became a last resort. When ammunition was exhausted, when fuel was low, when the bombers were escaping, some pilots aimed their fighters directly at the B-29s. Intentional mid-air collision. It was called Tayatari, body crashing. Not quite kamikaze, but close. Desperation weaponized. It rarely worked. The B-29 was enormous. A fighter strike might damage a wing or tail, but the bomber's redundancy, 4 engines, robust structure, allowed it to absorb punishment and keep flying. Japanese ground observers reported the raids with a mixture of awe and helplessness. They watched bomb bay doors open. They saw ordnance fall. But the aircraft themselves were barely visible. Tiny silver specks in the stratosphere, too high to see details, too high to hear engines until the sound arrived seconds later, distorted by distance. The psychological impact was profound. Japan's military had promised the home islands were untouchable. Now, enemy bombers appeared overhead with impunity, air raid sirens wailed, people sheltered, bombs fell. And when survivors emerged, they saw no wreckage in the sky, no shot-down bombers burning, no parachutes, just destruction and silence from above. Angle 4. Curtis LeMay's strategic shift high, altitude, precision vs. Low-altitude incendiary. Major General Curtis E. LeMay arrived in the Marianas in January 1945. He replaced Hansel. The official reason was mission effectiveness. The real reason was results, or lack of them. Hansel's high-altitude precision bombing campaign had flown dozens of missions against Japanese industrial targets. Bombing accuracy was abysmal. Cloud cover obscured targets. High-altitude winds, the jet stream, not yet fully understood, pushed formations off course. Bombs scattered across Tokyo neighborhoods, missing factories entirely. LeMay had a reputation, cold, calculating, ruthless. He didn't care about theory. He cared about destroying Japan's ability to wage war. He studied the data. High-altitude missions, minimal losses, minimal damage. The B-29s were surviving, but they weren't winning. Japan's war production continued. Factories operated. Aircraft rolled off assembly lines. Ships sailed. LeMay saw the problem clearly. Altitude protected the bombers, but it also reduced effectiveness. From 30-0 feet, hitting a specific building was nearly impossible. Wind drift at altitude could push bombs hundreds of yards off target. The northern bomb site was accurate in theory. In practice over Japan, it was guesswork, and Japanese cities were different from German cities. European industrial centers were concentrated. Brick and concrete structures, steel frameworks, centralized power plants. Bombs that missed the factory might still sever rail lines, destroy warehouses, kill workers. Japanese cities were dispersed. Residential neighborhoods housed small workshops and cottage industries. A single city block might contain a dozen small machine shops, producing aircraft parts, ball bearings, electrical components. These weren't marked on maps. They weren't distinct from residential buildings. Precision bombing couldn't destroy that kind of infrastructure, but fire could. Japanese construction was overwhelmingly wood and paper. Centuries of earthquakes had made masonry buildings rare. Cities were tinderboxes. The Great Kanto earthquake of 1923 had killed over 100,000 people, most burned to death in firestorms, not crushed by rubble. LeMay understood fire's potential. He had overseen incendiary raids in Europe. He knew what napalm and magnesium did to urban areas. He knew that fire didn't need precision. Fire spread. Fire consumed everything. In early March 1945, LeMay made a radical decision. He ordered low-altitude night raids with incendiary bombs. The order shocked crews: fly at 5,000 to 7,000 feet, strip the bombers of most defensive guns to increase bomb load, bomb at night to reduce visibility for air gunners and fighters, carry nothing but incendiaries, M69 napalm cluster bombs. It was the opposite of everything they'd trained for. Low altitude meant vulnerability. Every AA gun in Tokyo could reach 7,000 feet. Fighters could intercept easily. Night flying over water was dangerous. Navigation errors meant death. And removing defensive guns felt like suicide. But LeMay's logic was brutal and sound. Japanese night fighters were limited. Radar-guided AA fire was primitive. If the bombers came in low and fast, scattered across time, the defenses would be overwhelmed. Losses would occur, but damage would be catastrophic. He was willing to trade blood for results. The first low-altitude incendiary raid launched on the night of March 9, 1945. Target: Tokyo, over 300 B-29s. No high-altitude protection, no defensive gun turrets, just speed, darkness, and 665 tons of napalm. It was the single most destructive bombing raid in human history. 16 square miles of Tokyo burned. An estimated 100,000 people died in a single night, more than Hiroshima or Nagasaki. Firestorms generated winds strong enough to uproot trees. Canals boiled. People who jumped into water for safety were cooked alive. LeMay's bet paid off. 14 B-29s were lost, less than 5%. Damage was total. The area bombed ceased to exist. But this was not the invisible war anymore. This was fire from the sky, low, close. Personal, the high-altitude advantage that had defined the B-29's early missions became secondary. The psychological weapon shifted from untouchable invisibility to inescapable inferno. Angle 5, the psychological weapon invisibility as terror before the low-altitude raids, before the fire. There was the invisible enemy. It was a unique form of terror. Human beings fear what they can see. The fighter diving, the shell arcing, the tank approaching. But they fear even more what they cannot see. The sniper in the shadows, the submarine beneath the surface, the bomber too high to track. November and December 1944, January 1945. The early B-29 raids operated in this psychological space. Sirens wailed. Citizens looked up. The sky was empty. Minutes passed. Then the sound. Distant rumbling, sourceless. Then explosions. Buildings collapsed. Fires erupted. People died. And when survivors looked for the attackers, they saw nothing. Just blue sky or clouds, or at night stars. The invisibility was disorienting. Defense mechanisms, seeking shelter, identifying threats, estimating distance, all failed. You couldn't gauge how close the bombers were. You couldn't predict when bombs would fall. You couldn't estimate if the danger was passing. You just waited. Civil defense protocols became hollow rituals. Spotters couldn't spot. Air crews fired blindly. Firefighters responded to destruction they couldn't prevent. The sense of helplessness spread from the military to the civilian population. Radio broadcasts tried to maintain morale. Announcers described successful intercepts that didn't happen. They claimed downed bombers that never fell. They assured listeners that defenses were improving, that new weapons were coming, that the tide would turn. People stopped believing. They saw the contrails, thin white lines scratched across the sky at impossible heights. They heard the bombs fall, they smelled the smoke, and they knew the Americans could strike whenever they wanted, wherever they wanted, and Japan could do nothing about it. This psychological erosion was strategic in itself. A terrified population demands resources: shelters, civil defense, medical care, food distribution. A terrified population loses productivity. Factory workers spend shifts watching the sky instead of assembling engines. A terrified population questions leadership. Why can't the military stop this? Why are we still fighting? The invisible bomber was more than a weapons platform. It was a message: we own the sky, we own your cities. We can end you at will, and there was no rebuttal, no counter. Message: no demonstration of effective defense. Only the silence between raids and the dread of the next one. Angle 6. The moral paradox: distance from destruction. The men who flew the B-29 at 0 feet never saw faces. They saw industrial complexes, rail yards, dockyards, grids of buildings designated by alphanumeric codes. Target 357, target 90. 30. They saw map overlays and reconnaissance photographs. They didn't see people. From 6 miles up, cities looked like models, neat, abstract. The bombardier adjusted his sight. He tracked the crosshairs over the aiming point. He toggled the release. Bombs tumbled free. The bomber lifted, suddenly lighter, and banked away. Minutes later, far below, the bombs impacted. Flashes, smoke. But by then, the bomber was miles away, already turning for home. There was no immediacy, no screaming, no blood, no smell of burning flesh. Just distance. This distance made the mission bearable. Crews understood abstractly that they were killing people. But abstract understanding is different from witnessing. A soldier who shoots an enemy at 10 feet carries that face forever. A bombardier who drops ordnance from 0 feet sees nothing. The altitude that protected them physically also protected them psychologically. Some crew members wrestled with this. In letters home, they wrote carefully, "We hit the target today. The mission was successful." They didn't describe what success meant. They didn't describe the factories that were also neighborhoods. They didn't describe the workers, who were also fathers and mothers and children. Chaplains on Saipan and Tinian heard confessions. Men asked if what they were doing was murder. The chaplains offered reassurance. This was war, this was necessary, the enemy started this. The enemy would do worse if given the chance. It was true, and it was also insufficient, because the altitude that made the B-29 invisible to the Japanese also made the Japanese invisible to the B-29 crews. Out of sight, out of mind, out of moral reckoning until after the war, when the totals were counted, when the photographs of burned cities were published, when the human cost became undeniable. The high-altitude doctrine was clinically efficient. It minimized American casualties, it maximized strategic impact, and it allowed young men to participate in industrial scale killing without the psychological breakdown that close quarters killing induces. Whether that was mercy or tragedy depends on who you ask. What is certain is this: the distance between bomber and target was measured in more than feet. It was measured in the space between action and consequence, between duty and horror, between necessity and guilt, and that space was vast. November 24, 1944, 111 B-29 Superfortresses lift from Saipan's runways beginning at 6:15 a.m. The takeoffs are staggered. One bomber every 45 seconds. Each aircraft weighs over 135 pounds. Fuel tanks full, bomb bays loaded with 500-pound general purpose bombs. The runway is 500 feet of crushed coral. There is no margin for error. Full throttle, engines screaming. The bomber accelerates slowly, fighting inertia and gravity. The end of the runway approaches, the nose lifts, wheels leave the ground, climb rate, minimal, the ocean waits below, dark and indifferent. One by one they climb, formation assembly takes an hour. Bombers circle over the ocean, gaining altitude, joining their groups. Lead aircraft fire flares. Green, red identifying marks. Wings slide into position. Bombardiers check their equipment. Navigators confirm headings, gunners test. fire their weapons into empty sky. By 8:00 a.m. the formation is complete, heading north-northwest, speed 220 miles per hour. Altitude, climbing through 18,000 feet. The flight to Tokyo will take 6 hours. Inside the bombers, crews settle into routine. The flight engineer monitors engine temperatures. The radio operator listens to static, filled frequencies. The bombardier double checks the northern sight's calibration. The pilot and co-pilot fly in shifts, trading control, conserving energy. The Pacific stretches below, endless, featureless. Navigation is by dead reckoning and celestial sightings. If the navigators miscalculate, the bombers will miss Japan entirely, run out of fuel over open ocean, and ditch. Rescue is unlikely, the ocean is too vast, search aircraft have limited range. Crews don't talk about this. They focus on the mission. By 11:00 a.m., the formation reaches 25,000 feet. Still climbing, the air is thin. Breath comes harder. The pressurization system hums, maintaining cabin altitude at 8,000 feet equivalent. Outside, the temperature is 50 below zero. Ice forms on the wings. Frost creeps across windows. At 12:30 p.m. landfall. The southern coast of Honshu appears through haze, tiny islands, fishing villages. Then the mainland, mountains, valleys, roads threading through forests. From this altitude, it looks peaceful, untouched. The formation climbs to 30,000 feet. Japanese radar operators detect the formation at 12:40 p.m. Contact reports race through communication networks. Air Defense Command centers scramble to respond, but confusion spreads immediately. The altitude readings don't make sense. Radar shows contacts above 9,000 meters, nearly 30,000 feet. Some operators assume equipment malfunction. Others assume misidentification. Nothing flies that high, but the reports multiply. Multiple stations confirm this is real. Fighter groups across the Kanto Plain receive scramble orders. Pilots sprint to their aircraft. Ground crews spin propellers. Engines cough to life. Zeros, Ki-43s, Ki-44s, every available interceptor launches. Airfields at Chofu, Fusa, Takikawa, Atsugi fighters claw into the sky. The climb is desperate. Pilots push throttles to maximum. Engines roar. Manifold pressure gauges redline. Altitude gain 3,000 feet per minute at sea level, but as they climb, performance degrades. At 15,000 feet, climb rate drops to 2,000 feet per minute. At 20,000 feet, 1,500. At 25,000 feet, less than 1,000, they're not going to make it in time. Sergeant Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's most experienced fighter aces, climbs in a zero from Yokosuka Naval Air Base. He reaches 22,000 feet and sees them. Contrails, dozens of white lines scratched across the sky impossibly high. He continues climbing, his engine strains. The controls feel sluggish. The air is too thin. His oxygen flow is set to maximum. His breath comes in gasps. At 28,000 feet, his zero shudders, the engine coughs. He's at the edge of the aircraft's performance envelope. The bombers are still 2,000 feet above him, maybe more. He tries to gain altitude. The stick feels like it's moving through mud. He's close enough to see them now. Not details, just dark shapes against bright sky. He counts 14, 16, maybe more. They're in formation. Tight, deliberate, moving steadily toward Tokyo. Sakai arms his guns. He noses up, attempting a climb angle that will bring him into firing range. His airspeed bleeds off, the zero wallows, warning signs, buffeting, loss of control authority. If he stalls at this altitude, he'll tumble and recovering will cost thousands of feet. He noses down, abandons the intercept, watches the bombers pass overhead. He's not alone, across the sky. Dozens of Japanese fighters reach their ceiling and find the same result. The Americans are unreachable. Some pilots try long range shots. They fire from 10, 0 yards below, hoping for lucky hits. Tracers arc upward, losing energy, falling away. The B-29s fly on, untouched. Anti-aircraft batteries open fire, gunners track the sound. They can't see the bombers clearly, just glints of reflected sunlight. They elevate their guns to maximum angle, fire, the shells climb 75 mm, 88 mm, 105 mm. Fuse is set for altitude, but even maximum fuse settings detonate below the formation. Black puffs of smoke burst at 25,000 feet. The bombers are at 30,000. It's like shooting at the moon. Tokyo's civil defense sirens scream. Citizens have been through drills. They know the procedure, shelters, basements, away from windows, but this time feels different. The sound, that deep engine rumble, doesn't come from any direction. It's everywhere. Overhead, all around, people look up. They see nothing, just empty sky. At 1:15 p.m., the lead bombardier of the 73rd Bombardment Wing identifies the target. The Musashino Aircraft Engine Plant, Western Tokyo. 9 large buildings arranged in a rectangular complex, recognizable from reconnaissance photos. But there's a problem. The jet stream. No one fully understood the jet stream in November 1944. Meteorologists knew high-altitude winds existed, but not their strength or behavior. Over Japan at 30,000 feet, winds exceed 200 miles per hour from the west. The bombers are flying into a headwind that cuts their ground speed nearly in half, and now on the bomb run, flying straight and level, that headwind pushes them. The bombardier adjusts, he compensates for drift, but the wind is inconsistent, gusting, shifting. His calculations are approximations. The formation tightens, bomb bay doors open. The lead bombardier's northern sight tracks the target. Crosshairs aiming point, the plant slides into view, he fine-tunes, the sight automatically feeds corrections to the autopilot. The bomber flies itself now, locked onto the bombing solution. At 1:24 p.m., the lead bombardier toggles release. Bombs tumble from the bay. Each bomber in the formation follows, intervalometer set to automatic. Bomb bays empty, over 1,005, 100-pound bombs fall, from release to impact 58 seconds, the bombs accelerate. Gravity plus initial velocity. They're not falling straight. The wind pushes them. They drift east. The bombardier's compensated, but not enough. The jet stream is stronger than predicted. Impact. Explosions ripple across western Tokyo. But they're scattered. Some hit the Musashino plant, roofs collapse, walls shatter, machinery buried under rubble. But most bombs fall long or short or wide. Residential neighborhoods take hits, a school. A hospital, a marketplace. The damage to the plant is significant but not crippling. Production will slow, repairs will take weeks, but the factory will continue operating. From 30,000 feet, the crews can't assess results. They see smoke, fires, flashes, they assume success. The plant is burning, mission accomplished. The formation banks south, heading home. Japanese fighters, still in the air, make futile pursuit attempts. A few pilots with fuel remaining try diving attacks from above. A desperate tactic. They climb as high as possible, then nose over, building speed in a dive, hoping to reach attack position before the B-29's gunners react. Lieutenant Isamu Kashiide in a Kai-44 Shoki attempts this. He climbs to 33,000 feet, higher than he's ever flown. His vision tunnels, his fingers are numb, he noses over. The dive is steep. His airspeed builds 300 miles per hour, 350, 400. The bomber formation is below him now. He picks a target, lines up, closer, closer. The B-29's tail gunner sees him. Turret swivels, twin, 50. Calibers open fire. Tracers stream past Kashiide's canopy. He doesn't break off, he's committed, he fires. 212, 7mm machine guns, 220mm cannons, recoil shudders through the airframe, hits, he sees hits, pieces tear from the B-29's left wing, smoke trails. But the bomber doesn't fall, it doesn't even break formation. Kashiide pulls out of his dive, the G. Forces crush him into his seat, His vision grays. He's below the formation now, energy spent, vulnerable. He dives away, escape. The damaged B-29, aircraft number 44-69803, call sign Rover Boys Express, flies on. The left inboard engine is trailing smoke. The pilot feathers the propeller, oil pressure dropping. But 3 engines are enough. The bomber maintains altitude, maintains speed, stays in formation. They make it home. The return flight is 6 hours of mechanical anxiety and fuel calculations. Crews monitor gauges obsessively. Oil pressure, cylinder head temperature, fuel flow. Every fluctuation could mean disaster. The Pacific sprawls below. Dark blue empty, offering no emergency landing options. If an engine fails catastrophically, if fuel consumption exceeds estimates, the bomber ditches. Survival odds in those waters are low. Rover Boys Express with its smoking engine loses altitude gradually. The pilot trims the aircraft, balancing thrust from 3 engines. The formation leader radios. Status check. The pilot responds, able to maintain 220 miles per hour, descending slowly, fuel sufficient. They'll make it, probably. Other bombers report damage. Flak fragments punctured fuel tanks, hydraulic lines severed. One aircraft has a jammed bomb bay door. Bombs still aboard, unable to release. The crew will have to land with live ordnance in the bay. Dangerous, but survivable if the landing is smooth. At 5:00 p.m., the formation crosses back over the Japanese coast. Heading south, open ocean again. The sun lowers toward the horizon. Navigation becomes critical. Miss the Marianas in darkness, and there's no second chance. By 7:30 p.m., Saipan's navigation beacon appears on radio direction finders. Crews exhale. The island is close. Fuel gauges read near empty, but close enough. Runways are lit. Ground crews stand ready. The formation breaks. Aircraft peel off for individual landings. Interval, 2 minutes between touchdowns. The tower coordinates, priority to damaged aircraft. Rover Boys Express lands first. Emergency vehicles line the runway. The bomber approaches, landing gear down, flaps extended. Airspeed, 120 miles per hour. The wheels kiss the coral runway. The pilot brakes. The bomber slows, stops. The 3 functioning engines shut down. The 4th, the damaged one, is already cold. Ground crews swarm the aircraft. Fire suppression teams stand ready. But there's no fire, just oil streaking the left wing, carbon scoring around the engine cowling. Repairable, the crew climbs out. Legs shaky, exhausted. They've been airborne for 13 hours and 40 minutes. The bombardier lights a cigarette with trembling hands. The navigator vomits onto the taxiway, delayed air sickness. The pilot reports to debriefing. One by one the bombers land. 109 aircraft return, 2 are missing. One went down over Tokyo. Anti-aircraft fire severed a fuel line. The bomber caught fire, broke apart over the city. Witnesses reported parachutes, but the crew's fate is unknown, captured probably, maybe dead. The other disappeared over the Pacific. Radio contact lost after the bomb run. No distress call. No wreckage sighted. 11 men gone. The loss rate, less than 2%. Acceptable by any strategic calculation. Debriefing sessions run through the night. Intelligence officers question crews. What did you see? How heavy was the flak? Did fighters reach you? How many? What types? Did you observe impacts? Damage assessment. The answers vary. Some crews report accurate bombing. Others admit cloud cover obscured the target. Some saw fires. Others saw nothing through the haze. The bombardiers defend there were. Wind speed was higher than forecast. Drift compensation was difficult. The Norden site performed within specifications. Reconnaissance aircraft will fly over Tokyo tomorrow. Photos will reveal the truth, but the mission's success isn't measured solely by bomb damage. It's measured by proof of concept. The B-29 can reach Tokyo. It can operate at altitudes Japanese defenses can't effectively counter. It can deliver ordnance and return with minimal losses. The invisible war works. Back in Tokyo, the fires burn through the night. Firefighters battle blazes across western neighborhoods. The Musashino plant smolders. 3 buildings collapsed. 2 more heavily damaged. Machinery twisted and buried. Workers dig through rubble searching for survivors. Bodies are pulled from wreckage. The count will take days, but it's not just the plant. Residential areas took hits. A bomb struck an apartment complex. 4 stories pancaked into rubble. Another hit a crowded street during the raid. Body parts scattered across pavement. Shops destroyed. A clinic obliterated. Patients and doctors killed instantly. Casualty figures are suppressed. The government doesn't want panic. Official reports mention minor damage and successful air defense. They claim 12 B-29s shot down, a fabrication. They describe heroic fighter pilots driving off the enemy, a story, not history. People know better. They saw the sky, they saw nothing. They heard the bombs, they buried the dead. Air Defense Command holds emergency meetings. Generals and admirals debate options. How do we stop this? The answers are inadequate. Build more high-altitude fighters. That takes months and resources are scarce. Improve radar. That requires technology Japan doesn't possess. Train pilots for extreme altitude interception. That requires time, and experienced pilots are dying faster than replacements can be trained. Someone suggests night raids instead of day raids. The Americans won't risk high-altitude operations in darkness. Navigation is too difficult. The meeting agrees. This is a temporary problem. Daylight defense will improve. New tactics will emerge, but privately many officers understand the reality. Japan has lost control of its own sky. The November 24 raid is the first of many. November 27, another Tokyo raid. 81 B-29. Target industrial zones, results mixed, losses minimal. November 29, 29 B-29s hit Tokyo again. Cloud cover obscures targets, bombing scattered, 1 aircraft lost. December brings more raids, Nagoya. Kobe, Osaka, the pattern repeats, high altitude, formation bombing, minimal losses, scattered damage. Japanese defenses adapt slowly, more fighters scramble. Pilots develop new tactics. Some try formation, attacks multiple fighters, hitting a single bomber simultaneously. Occasionally it works. A B-29 falls, burning, crew bailing out if they're lucky. But the math doesn't favor Japan. For every bomber shot down, 10 reach the target. For every mission where defenses achieve even modest success, 3 more proceed unopposed. Production statistics tell the story. By December 1944, the Roman 21 Bomber Command flies 10 bomber sorties per month. Each B-29 carries an average of 4 tons of ordnance. That's 4 tons per month falling on Japanese cities and factories. German cities endured similar tonnage from the Allied bomber offensive in Europe. But Germany had hundreds of fighters, thousands of anti-aircraft guns, sophisticated radar networks. Japan has fewer resources, less industrial capacity, and an enemy that operates at altitudes where oxygen is scarce and engines fail. The invisible bombardment continues through December and into January 1945. Crews grow more confident, mechanical reliability improves, new tactics emerge, radar bombing through clouds, Pathfinder aircraft marking targets with incendiaries, tighter formations for concentrated bombing patterns. Japanese pilots grow more desperate, ramming attacks increase. Pilots deliberately fly into B-29, sacrificing themselves to down the bomber. Sometimes it works. The bomber disintegrates or loses control or breaks apart. But even then, the sacrifice rarely achieves strategic impact. 1 bomber down, 100 more coming tomorrow. By January, Tokyo has been raided 15 times, Nagoya 7 times, Osaka 5. The cities still stand. Industry still produces, but capacity declines. Workers lose shifts to air raid disruptions. Transportation networks suffer damage. Power grids become unreliable, and the psychological toll compounds. Citizens live under constant threat of invisible attack. Sirens interrupt daily life. Shelters fill. People wait. Sometimes bombs fall. Sometimes they don't. The uncertainty is corrosive. This is the high-altitude campaign. Strategic, methodical, calculated. It is working. slowly, incrementally grinding down Japan's ability to sustain war production. But in Washington, patience is limited. Generals demand faster results. The war needs to end. Casualty projections for an invasion of the Japanese home islands are staggering. Estimates range from 500,000 to over 1 million American dead, and multiples more Japanese casualties. The B-29 is supposed to make invasion unnecessary, but precision bombing isn't achieving that goal fast enough. Curtis LeMay's arrival in January 1945 changes everything. He reviews the data. He sees the problem. High-altitude precision bombing is elegant. It's humane, relatively. It limits civilian casualties. It targets military and industrial assets specifically. But it's not winning. LeMay doesn't care about elegance. He cares about ending the war, and he knows fire is more effective than high explosive. He knows Japanese cities will burn. He knows low-altitude attacks will increase losses, but also increase damage exponentially. The invisible war is about to become very visible. March 9, 1945. The order goes out. Tonight's raid, Tokyo, altitude, 5 zeros, 0 to 7 zeros, 0 feet. Ordnance, incendiaries only. Strip defensive guns to increase bomb load. Bomb individually, not in formation. Saturate the target area. Create firestorms. Crews are stunned. This is suicide. Flying low means every gun in Tokyo can hit them. Flying without defensive armament means fighters will slaughter them. LeMay's response is blunt. The Japanese don't have effective night fighters. Their radar, directed flak is poor, and if we come in low and fast, they won't have time to respond effectively. Losses will be acceptable. Damage will be total. That night, 334 B-29s take off from the Marianas. They carry 665 tons of incendiaries, M69 cluster bombs, each canister containing 47 individual bomblets filled with napalm gel. On impact, the bomblets scatter and ignite. Each one burns at 20 degrees. Each one is designed to stick to surfaces and spread fire. The bombers arrive over Tokyo after midnight. They come in low. They come in scattered. The first wave drops Pathfinder incendiaries, creating an X marking the target area. Subsequent waves bomb the X. The effect is apocalyptic. 16 square miles ignite. Wooden buildings explode into flame. Fire spreads faster than people can run. Winds generated by the heat. Convection currents rising, cold air rushing in reach hurricane force. The firestorm becomes self-sustaining. It consumes everything combustible. People, animals, homes, temples, schools. The heat is so intense that metal melts, glass fuses, canals boil. People who jump into water for safety are cooked alive. Those who hide in shelters suffocate as the fire consumes all oxygen. By dawn, the firestorm has burned itself out. What remains is ash, rubble, charred corpses some fused together, families who died embracing, the death toll, approximately 100,000 in a single night, more than Hiroshima, more than Nagasaki, more than any single air raid in history. The B-29 losses, 14 aircraft, 4%. LeMay's gamble succeeded. The invisible war is over. The fire war has begun. The morning of March 10, 1945, reveals what industrial scale fire can do. Reconnaissance aircraft fly over Tokyo at first light. Cameras capture the devastation. Entire neighborhoods reduced to ash. Streets lined with charred bodies. Survivors wander through smoking ruins, faces blank, eyes empty. The images are classified, too disturbing for public release. 15 square miles of Tokyo no longer exist. Not damaged, not destroyed, gone. The city center Asakusa, Honjo, Fukugawa has been erased. Over 267,000 buildings burned. 1 million people are homeless. Hospitals overflow. Bodies are stacked in temples, in schools, in any structure still standing. The Sumida River carried corpses downstream for days. Workers used poles to push them toward collection points. Mass graves were dug in parks. Cremations ran continuously, but there weren't enough facilities. Some bodies were simply buried in rubble. The psychological impact was immediate and profound. Tokyo had been bombed before. Citizens had endured high-altitude raids, had grown accustomed to sirens and shelters and occasional destruction. But this was different. This was obliteration. This was proof that nowhere was safe, that shelters were tombs, that the American bombers could descend from their invisible heights and touch the earth with fire. Morale didn't collapse overnight. Japan was a nation built on duty and endurance. But cracks appeared. Factory attendance dropped. Workers failed to report. Some fled to the countryside. Others simply stopped, too traumatized, too exhausted, too hopeless to continue. The government responded with propaganda. Radio broadcasts praised the resilience of Tokyo's citizens. Newspapers published stories of heroic firefighters and selfless neighbors. The emperor himself issued a statement expressing grief and calling for continued sacrifice. But the propaganda felt hollow. People had seen the truth. They had breathed the smoke. They had counted the dead. And they knew more raids were coming. LeMay didn't hesitate. The March 9-10 raid proved the concept. Low-altitude incendiary attacks worked. They achieved massive damage with acceptable losses. He ordered immediate follow-up raids. March 11, Nagoya, 285 B-29s, 2 square miles burned, industrial districts crippled. March 13, Osaka, 274 B-29s, 8 square miles destroyed, over 4 zeros, 0 dead. March 16, Kobe, 307 B-29s, 3 square miles incinerated, port facilities wrecked. March 19, Nagoya again, 290 B-29s. Additional industrial zones targeted. The raids came every few days. Japanese air defenses tried to adapt. Night fighters, twin-engine Nakajima J-1, Ngeko interceptors equipped with crude airborne radar, scrambled to meet the bombers. Some successes occurred. A Gecko pilot named Shinobu Omori shot down 2 B-29s in a single sortie, attacking from below where defensive armament was weakest. But individual heroics couldn't stop 300 bombers dropping 2,000 tons of napalm. The math was simple and brutal. Even if defenses shot down 10% of attackers, an unsustainable loss rate for the Americans, 90% still reached the target, and 90% was enough to burn a city. By April 1945, Japan's major industrial cities were targeted systematically. The Roman 21 Bomber Command maintained a list: Tokyo, Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, Yokohama. Each city was bombed, then rebombed. Fires were deliberately set in areas that had been spared in previous raids. The goal was comprehensive destruction of urban industrial capacity. Japanese war production collapsed accordingly. Aircraft factories in Nagoya produced 200 planes in February 1945. By May, production had dropped to 600. By July, fewer than 300. Not just from direct bomb damage, factories could be repaired, but from disrupted supply chains, displaced workers, destroyed tooling, and the general chaos of operating industry under constant bombardment. Oil refineries were targeted, fuel depots, rail yards, docks. Anything that supported the war effort burned. And because Japanese cities mixed residential and industrial zones, everything burned together. The human cost was staggering but difficult to quantify precisely. Official Japanese government records were destroyed or lost during the war's final months. Post-war estimates vary. Conservative figures suggest 300 civilians killed by B-29 incendiary raids. Higher estimates approach 500 millions more were injured or displaced. For context, the 2 atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 killed approximately 200 people combined immediately and from radiation effects. The conventional firebombing campaign killed more. It's just that the deaths occurred across dozens of raids, across multiple cities, across months, distributed in a way that diluted the psychological impact compared to a single atomic flash. But to those who lived through it, the distinction was meaningless. Fire or radiation, both killed indiscriminately, both erased neighborhoods, both left survivors with memories too horrible to articulate. The B-29 crews who executed these raids lived with their own burdens. Low-altitude missions meant they saw the results. At 5,000 feet, cities weren't abstract grids. They were buildings, streets, people. Crews could see figures running through flames. They could see the firestorms they created, orange and red swirling columns rising thousands of feet. They flew through the smoke. The smell penetrated the aircraft. Burning wood, burning oil, burning flesh. Some crews struggled with this. Letters home became terse, evasive. Another mission today. Everyone's fine. What else could they write? How do you tell your mother you helped burn one? 100 zeros. 0 people alive. Chaplains on Saipan reported increased attendance at services. Men sought absolution, reassurance, meaning. Some chaplains offered it. This is war, this is necessary, we didn't start this, remember Pearl Harbor. Others were less certain, they listened, they offered no answers. A few crew members requested reassignment. Combat fatigue, psychological strain, most requests were denied, the missions continued. Crews flew, bombed, returned. The cycle repeated. LeMay himself showed no public doubt. He understood the moral weight of what he ordered. Years later, he would acknowledge it bluntly. If we'd lost the war, we'd all have been prosecuted as war criminals. But he believed the alternative, invasion, would have cost more lives, American and Japanese. The bombing campaign would save lives by ending the war sooner. It's a calculation that can't be proven or disproven. History only shows one path. The path chosen was fire. By June 1945, Japan's strategic position was hopeless. The B-29 campaign had gutted industrial capacity. Over 60 cities had been bombed, some repeatedly, some until nothing remained to burn. Tokyo had been raided 8 times, Osaka 5, Nagoya 6, smaller cities, Toyama, Fukui, Hitachi, Numazu, were incinerated in single raids. The statistics were overwhelming. The Roman 21 Bomber Command had flown over 30 zero sorties. They had dropped 147 0 tons of bombs, roughly 40% incendiary, 60% high explosive. They had destroyed 5 million buildings. They had rendered 15 million people homeless. Transportation networks collapsed. Rail lines were severed, bridges destroyed, ports unusable. Moving raw materials from mines to factories, or finished products from factories to military units, became nearly impossible. Supply chains that had sustained Japan's war machine for years simply stopped functioning. Food distribution failed. Japan had always relied on import. Rice from Korea and Taiwan, fish from coastal waters, vegetables from agricultural regions. Bombing disrupted all of it. Urban populations faced starvation. Rations dropped to 100 calories per day, then lower. Black markets flourished, prices skyrocketed, people traded family heirlooms for rice, morale within the military deteriorated. Officers understood the strategic reality even if propaganda denied it. Japan couldn't win. The question was whether they could negotiate acceptable surrender terms, or whether the war would continue until complete annihilation. The high command split. Hardliners advocated Ketsugo, the final defense of the home islands. They spoke of 100 million deaths before surrender. They believed national honor required fighting to extinction. Moderates sought a negotiated peace. They reached out through neutral countries, Sweden, Switzerland, the Soviet Union, hoping to open diplomatic channels. But the Allies had declared unconditional surrender at the Casablanca Conference in 1943. There was no negotiation, only surrender or destruction. The B-29 campaign made the choice clearer. Every raid demonstrated American capability and will. They could burn Japan city by city, they could maintain the offensive indefinitely, and they were willing to, Emperor Hirohito, traditionally removed from military decisions, began expressing concerns privately. He questioned whether continuing the war served Japan's interests, whether the nation could survive, whether the people could endure. The military leadership resisted these questions. To admit defeat was to admit failure. To surrender was dishonor, the Bushido Code, the samurai ethos that permeated military culture, demanded death before capitulation, but even Bushido couldn't rebuild burned cities. It couldn't resurrect dead workers. It couldn't manufacture aircraft without factories or fuel. The atomic bombs in August 1945 are often credited with ending the war. Hiroshima on August 6, Nagasaki on August 9, the Emperor's surrender announcement on August 15. But the atomic bombs were delivered by B-29s, the same aircraft that had been burning Japanese cities for months. To Japanese civilians, the atomic bombs were another horror in a sequence of horrors. Worse, yes, more destructive per aircraft, radiation effects unknown and terrifying, but psychologically not fundamentally different from the firebombing they had already endured. Military planners understood the strategic shift. Atomic weapons meant cities could be obliterated by single bombers, making defense impossible. But to the average citizen sheltering in rubble, the distinction between being killed by napalm or by atomic fire was academic. The war ended, Japan surrendered unconditionally, American forces occupied the home islands, reconstruction began, the B-29 crews went home, most never spoke publicly about what they'd done. They returned to farms, factories, universities. They married, raised families, became the silent generation, men who carried the war internally, who didn't discuss it, who focused on building post-war America. For them, the high-altitude missions over Tokyo in late 1944, the invisible war, felt almost quaint in retrospect. Flying at 30,000 feet, untouchable, dropping bombs on grid coordinates, it had felt clean, strategic, distant. The firebombing missions destroyed that distance. They brought the bombers down to where they could see, hear, smell the destruction. Where the war became real and immediate and undeniable, which was more moral, the invisible bombing that preserved psychological separation, or the visible bombing that forced acknowledgement of consequences. There's no satisfying answer. Both killed, both destroyed, both contributed to Japan's surrender. Post-war analysis credited the B-29 campaign with decisive strategic impact. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey, conducted in 1946, concluded that even without the atomic bombs, even without Soviet entry into the war, Japan would have surrendered by November 1945 due to conventional bombing and naval blockade. The industrial base was destroyed, food supplies were critical, civilian morale was shattered, continued resistance was logistically impossible. Japan had lost the war by mid-1944, after the fall of Saipan, after the destruction of the mobile fleet, after the severing of maritime supply lines. The B-29 campaign simply accelerated the inevitable, translating strategic defeat into actual surrender. The aircraft itself became iconic. It represented technological supremacy, American engineering, mass production, operational capability. The B-29 was the most advanced bomber of World War II and arguably the most strategically consequential. Its altitude advantage, the invisibility that terrified Tokyo in November 1944, was revolutionary for its time. It demonstrated that technological superiority could overcome numerical and geographic disadvantages. It showed that distance was no longer protection, that ocean barriers could be crossed, that even island fortresses were vulnerable. Post-war, the B-29 influenced decades of strategic bomber development. The B-50, B-36, B-47, B-52, all descendants, conceptually, of the Superfortress.